Hey guys, thank you for tuning in. We're here. It's Saturday. We're going to discuss some endings, and I invite you to participate with me. And this is my own chess training, so I just want to share how I train, and maybe you can also teach me, how to improve on my game. So here we go. So I'm gonna start my timer now. 20 minutes. Okay. Okay, it's black to play. What should we do? I'm going to, when I'm solving chess puzzles, I record my answers on my notebook. So after I jot them down, I can compare if my answers are correct or not. Alright. So what can we do here? Black has the advantage here because he has his king is in the middle and his rook is more active than white's rook. And what's nice about this one is black's rook was able to cut off white's king, because black is, wherever you have the majority of your pawns, that's the side of the chessboard you want to create a pass pawn. So I have ideas like h4 and rook g4. Also I have ideas like b5. So okay, so after c takes b5, maybe rook d4, but we'll see. Oops. Okay. What should black do here? I would play h4. Then what is white's best move, best defense after h4? Is black threatening something? H takes g3 or h3, trying to get the black's pawn closer to the queening square. Okay, after black plays h4, and if the white pawn takes the pawn in h4, it's a bad idea because black can recapture with the rook. Then now white's pawn on h2 is isolated, easier to attack. Also, I have ideas like after, let's say, pawn h4, pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn. Let's say rook here on f2. I have this rook h3 check to push the king backward, so my king can penetrate later. But I think I have to play f4 first. I mean, this is a mess. I need to delete color moves, color commentary. Okay. Is there a way that I can get rid of this? Because if I go here, okay. There's too many arrows. Delete color commentary. Okay, there you go. I was able to delete the arrows. So confusing. Okay. So after h4, what can white do? Usually white's supposed to try to create a counterplay on the queen side with b4, and maybe if black takes, then now his rook has an a file. But the problem is black's king is much better placed than white's king. It's much closer to the queen side and the king side. And also, if like for example I play h4 and my opponent plays b4, I think I can take the pawn. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, a takes b pawn, then pawn takes pawn. Then I think I have b5. The idea is to force this pawn to stop defending the d5 pawn, so I can start like munching his pawns on the queen side, and also this d5 pawn becomes isolated. Oops, sorry. What's going on? There we go. Should be winning for black. Okay, after h4, how can white defend black's attack? white is almost in zigzwang because after h4, if black plays h4, it cannot take the pawn. Because otherwise, after rook takes, this pawn on h2 becomes isolated. Also, after h4, white cannot play b4 because pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. Then I think b5 just breaks up this its pawn on the queen side and the d pawn. So white is almost in zigzwang. But maybe rook f3, h4 rook f3 just to defend the pawn. After rook f3, then I think I can play h3 with the idea of rook d4 check. And after h3, I got this one. I learned this one from the book Pump Up Your Rating, authored by Grandmaster Axel Smith, and he and Grandmaster Tikkanen, they're both Swedish, I think, from Sweden, Grandmaster, and they were training, they were analyzing a game of Grandmaster Axel Smith against another player, and they were talking about this endgame, and Grandmaster Hans Tikkanen, he, even though his bishop, in another position, he has a light squared bishop, and he still recommended h3. The idea is to be able to get the pawn to as closer to the queening pawn, even though it's black. At least white has something to worry about if black is able to maneuver its rook to the 8th rank or then threaten the h2 pawn. So it's just a thought. How many more minutes? Okay. All right. 3, 4. Okay, h3 rook f3. H4 rook f3, h3 then rook e3. Is that possible? I don't know. Do I want to exchange my rook? H4 rook f3, maybe g4. Then rook e3, rook takes e3, king takes e3, f4, takes f4, king f5, and b4. Is that 1, 2, 1, 2, 3? Okay. That's interesting. One way of white's possible defense is to trade rooks. So after h4, rook f3, then rook d4 check. I think I have a tempo. Rook d4, then black has to decide where to put the king on c3 or e3. Let's say if king c3, then g4, and if rook e3 check, I just cover, because my idea is if, for example, white wants to trade rooks, then I can take the rook with a king, then play f4, then make a pass pawn on the make an h pass pawn on the king side. Okay. So h4, rook f3. Rook d4. What about king e3? King e3. King e3 after here. Here. There. Now white's threat is to take this f5. It's a decoy, so after I take this one, my rook on d4 hangs. So now I gotta decide. I have to move my rook. Then rook d1. G takes here, then g4. Yeah, okay, I think rook d1 is very good. After here, there, then rook d1. The idea is if, for example, white takes on the h pawn, then I can just play g4. Also, my rook is active on the h rank. Okay. I have to write down my moves. Okay, C3, I think still D1. Okay, let's look at this one. Okay, just gonna reset this time. Right. So black's best move according to Johan Hellsten, the author of this book, is h4. Material is even, but black's pieces are more active. With his next move, Cotoronius opens a new front on the king side, end quote. After h4, quote, such a majority attack is also quite common in the middle game, and I touch upon the subject in Mastering Chess Strategy. From now on, black can either turn the opposing minority into a single pawn, or he can fix a weakness on h2 by a further h4 to h3. Yes, I got it. h4 to h3 is one of the idea, which is what actually happened in the game. Okay, so rook g1. I didn't even consider this move. Maybe rook g4 now. So after g, instead of g takes rook g1, if takes here, then rook h4. Quote, the lonely h pawn soon becomes a burden for white. Example, rook e1, king d6, rook e2, king c5. The idea is to play here to break white's pawn chain. Also here, rook h2 check. But you have that idea. So if takes here, then the c4 pawn becomes weak. Okay. Rook g1 in h3 now. I'm just wondering what happened after rook f3. This is what I calculated. g4, then just go here, or rook f1. Rook off 1 is to prevent black from going there. Even h3 works. So the idea now is you're asking white what are you gonna do. Okay, maybe because if b4, then again here this takes here. Yeah, then here's the idea to break up white's central pawns. So it is difficult to play this position as white. Okay, and according to Stackfish 12, it's winning for black. All right, rook f3, then g4. What did I write down? I wrote down after rook f3, then rook d4. Can I still win after rook d4? I think yes. After rook d4, then it's a mistake, because after here I cannot play g4 anymore because of this one. Rook takes g4. That is the idea, and now white is winning. So rook d4 is a mistake. So my first instinct was to push the h pawn, which is correct. Rook d4. I was worried about rook e3. After here, can he just play here? Takes, so this involves calculation. Then g4. Okay. Now if the white king retreats, then you push the pawn on f4. Try to create a passed h pawn. And now, if for example here, this still works, then b5. Yes, b5 still works. That breakthrough for black still works. It's winning for black. Okay. Lesson learned. Let's go to the main line, which is rook g1. Okay, now what? h3? Yes, h3. Fixing a weakness on h2 and creating a queening scenario. And quote, the alternative h takes g3, d4, rook d4 check. If king e3, okay, then a4, breakthrough, breaking white's pawns on the queen side. Or king c3, b5, or rook g4 is interesting as well. Okay. Rook g4, what is the idea? To play here now. And if, for example, white plays here, I think f4. Am I correct? Is that black's idea? But I have to calculate this one. Pawn takes pawn, king takes pawn, rook takes, king takes, then c5, then just king here. King f5. Then the idea, black's idea is to just give up this pawn and use it as a decoy, then capture black's queenside pawns. I mean white's queenside pawns. Okay, all right, it's a good idea. Okay. Let's look at the h takes g3. I mean h3. Rook f1 g4. Quote, aware that white can't undertake much, Cotronius reinforces his pawn structure. g4. Okay, rook f2, then I think rook e1, right? Passive defense with rook f2 was called for. Wow, so it's better. Rook passive defense of rook f2 is better. But I can play rook e1, but rook e1, rook e2, then just exchanges, then I play f4. Black's supposed to be winning. Okay. Black could choose rook e1, preparing this idea. Rook g1 to g2. So with the h3 move, the plan is not just to get the h pawn closer to the queening file, but creating an outpost for rook on g2. What is an outpost? An outpost is a square where you can put your piece, knight, bishop, rook, queen, where it cannot be attacked by a pawn. That's an outpost. Okay, so in the game, I played b4. Mistake, then now takes. Yes, this is the typical breakthrough in this pawn structure. Code, a strong blow that leaves white's pawn structure in ruins. He takes here. Rook takes there. Now what? Black is threatening to take d5. But not d5 right away, because if I take the pawn on d5, then he takes the f5. So forget that. Maybe later. So black's main threat is to take the pawn and also play rook b2. Penguin. Okay. All right. Okay. So one. Rook b2 check. Quote, a typical intermediate check by which black displaces the enemy king before landing his rook on b2. So after cover, then rook b2. King c4, then rook b2. If rook c3, then just take. Then black is a pawn up. Then if king goes here, then I can just go here. Or maybe even try to get this pawn first. Try to get him into zugzwang. Or just push right away. Push the pawn. Takes g3. Yeah. Because that. And then queen. Black gets a queen first. Alright. So in the game, white played king c4 to defend this d5, the b5 pawn, and also get out of the check. Then rook b2, king here. Okay. White is threatening to go here, then take the pawn, then take here. Okay. Then, okay, now I think this one is very good because the idea is to, it's not rook b2. The idea is to go here. Then now he has this rook here. So d5, f4. Then takes, king takes f4, d8, rook takes, king takes, g3. It's supposed to be winning for black. I think this rook b2 wins too. Yep, rook b2 wins too. According to Stockfish 12. Alright. Okay, rook e2. What is the idea of rook e2? What is the idea of this one? Maybe just push the pawn on h2. Okay, after here, king takes e7. I mean, that's logical. King takes here, then b6. Then okay, now he goes to. Why not just go to the rook b2 right away? I'm just wondering. Then f4. I don't know. And b6 takes. Then rook d6. In here. Okay, time to create our connected pawns. Then f3. King e6. King e6. f3, then king c7. Am I going to lose? Yamos. King e5. Queen. Who takes? King takes d8. King e4. King here. There. It looks like even if black plays f3, black's still winning. Because now king can go get closer to my pawns on the center. Yeah, still winning according to Stockfish. Okay, so after wins 2. But king e6, you're trying to capture this pawn. Maybe check first before capturing. Rook e1. King f5. Okay, back there again. Then f3. Then let's see. King c7. Okay, I go here. d8. Rook takes. King takes. Then king here. Oh no, it's not. So Grandmaster Hellsten recommended h2. What is the idea? d8 takes here. If for the reason is if white goes there, then f2, and white cannot take the pawn on h2 because the queen. Black gets a queen. Okay. Nice. That's nice. Okay, f3, rook b1. Then does white have a trick like check then followed by rook d5? Maybe just h2, f2. I think even h2 wins. f2, rook b2. Then queen. The idea is takes. After f1 queen. White resign. Queen c1. King here, then takes. Rook. And king defends, then black gets another queen. Alright. It's a nice example. Let's go to the next one. Alright. Here we go. I'm gonna start the timer now. Alright. It's black to move. If black to move, then just take the pawn, I guess. So what's going to happen? Okay. Black can take the pawn, but if black takes the pawn on b4, then white can stop black from playing h4 to gain advantage on the king side. So maybe I can play h4 first, because anyway I can take the white's b pawn anytime. So maybe that's the correct move, because if rook takes b4 right away, then rook b6. After h4, maybe I can play e4 just to cut off this rook from controlling the fourth rank on the king side. But after rook takes b4, then rook b6. Then now what? Rook. Okay. After rook b6, then okay, so h4, f4, rook takes b4, then rook b6, then rook b2, king h3. Okay, after king h3, maybe I can take the pawn. H takes g3, h takes g3. Then push the pawn on b4. Or maybe I should not push the pawn on b4. Maybe after rook b2 I have to play. No, I have to push the pawn. My idea is to push the b pawn as far as closer to the queening square, then get my king, transfer my king to c3 where it defends the b2 pawn. I think this is good. It's a pretty good plan. Oops. H4, F4, okay. This here. E2. Okay, so now what? After B5, G4. I mean, after B4, G4, B3, B5. Rook here. Go back to G2, B2, and King H1. So Black King is just gonna go King H2, King G2, then King F8 here. Oh no, this is not good because I just realized that I can attack the F4 pawn. I thought Black's best plan is to try to get the try to defend the B2 pawn, but if White pushes its pawn like F4, G4, G5, then the pawns on F4 and G4 are going to be weakened. So instead of going, I have another plan. Instead of going towards the B2 pawn, I can also go like maneuver my piece maybe, then go on the king side, because the rook is gonna be busy watching my pawn on B2. Anyway, let's see. Need to write down my moves. Okay. Let's try to solve this one. So my answer is h4. Did I? Oh, it's not the correct answer. Okay. So rook, according to Grandmaster Hellsten's book, g5 is the correct one. Quote, black is about to win a pawn, but first it makes sense to restrict the enemy pawns. So what's wrong with... If rook takes b4, then h4. It prevents black from getting more space advantage on the king side, but what if here? I'm gonna turn on computer, what this computer says. Okay, not f4. Oh, f4 is okay too. But rook takes here, rook check, king here, takes, then here, now what? Rook b8, then I go here. I try to go there, we go here first, then there. King h4, then here, king g4. Ah, okay, so instead of white pushing the pawn, white uses its g pawn as a cover. Okay. Okay, here. Check. Okay, gotta hide first. King g5. Okay, still covered by the pawn. Now I don't have any tempo for like tempo check like this. It's not a check because white's pawn on g3 shields its king from any check. So now my rook is stuck, and if I go, for example, here, b2, okay, let's say rook b7, and I go here, because I'm trying to chase this rook. Okay, now king f6, now with the idea of trying to checkmate me. And this is not good, huh? Because if I go here, then check, rook b8 check, then king takes here. Now I'm the one who's playing for a draw because I cannot leave this. I cannot move my rook without giving up this pawn. So yeah, here, I'm trying to draw this one. I'm trying to get this pawn on f4. So okay, all right, learned something from this endgame. Turns out that white can also use its g pawn, because what I was thinking is white is trying to... I thought white's best continuation is to push the pawn on the king side, trying to create some attack or complications. But instead, computer says, do not push the g pawn. Instead, use it as a shield, then push your king and get it closer to the black king. It's genius. Okay, I'm just wondering, okay, takes here, I play here, what if g4? Okay, g4 is a mistake according to StatFish 12, because b3 is a winning. Okay, okay, g5. Okay, horrible move. King here. Okay, rook b1 first, then rook b7, then b2. Now king has to go back here. Otherwise, rook check, then followed by the queen. So the best squares for the white king is to stay here on g2 or h2. If the king goes here on h2, then, like for example here, go here, then decided to go, like, I want to get closer to the b pawn, then boom, losing. Because after rook takes b2, that's an x-ray. King here, you lose the rook. So the white king's safest squares in this position is the g2 and h2. So there are no nasty x-rays. Okay, king f8. Okay, rook b8, king e7. Rook b6 cut off, cutting off my king so it cannot advance. What if I go here? So rook b3. Okay, I'm trying to capture this pawn. Rook b7. Okay, if I go here, then rook takes f7. What if I go here? Rook b4, cutting me off again. That's crazy. Rook keeps on cutting me off. And also remember, that's one of the nice things about your rook, especially in the endgame. It's not just for files, but use them on the ranks too. Ranks, squares, group of squares going sideways, sideward. The files are a group of squares going up and down. So this is the fourth rank, and the white rook just owns it. Okay, here, then go back here. So if I go here, then check. Okay, then here. Then if it takes, then rook b6. It takes. Okay. So this is a theoretical draw. Because even if black is able to, let's say here, black is able to push the pawn to g. Black, I don't think black can win, because white's king is perfectly placed here on g2, and like for example here I go rook b5, king here, rook b4, king here, and rook b8. And whenever the black king starts, you know, defending the b2 pawn, so to free the rook on b1, so you can move, then queen, you're gonna start pestering him with check. So like for example, okay, let's just say example here, then you just keep on checking on the bottom, and rook b8. Okay, trying to get me, then rook b3. And even if you keep on pushing, push, you don't do anything. You don't even touch it. Don't touch a g3 pawn. So this is a nice technical draw on rook and pawn ending. Wow. Okay. And black is a 2 pawns up. It's still a draw. It's crazy. All right, let's go to the main line. I'm learning a lot of things today. This is nice. Okay, g5. So this is a game between Alexeyev, Russian Grandmaster Alexeyev, and Neponiachi. Nepo. In year 2010 in Havana, Cuba. So f4, Alexeyev opts for active defense, aware that after rook b6, rook takes b4, followed by f7 to f6, king g6 to f5 to e5, etc. Black has quite a favorable version of the typical ending with a passed queenside pawn, which we explored in the previous chapter. Okay. So after f4, g4, code fixing a weakness on h2. Remember our first example is where black played h4, h3 to fix a weakness on the h2, just to prevent the h-pawn, white's h-pawn from moving. Okay, so the obvious g takes f4, then white had prepared, what is, okay, here, king f3? Oh no, it's not. White had prepared rook b6. So after here, then takes. Now, if black takes, then rook takes here. Now, it's a one-wing rook and pawn ending where it's gonna be a draw. And one thing when you're playing rook and pawn ending, if you want to win, don't put the game into a one side where all the pawns are on the king side. It's either on the king side or the queen side. Otherwise, it's gonna be a draw. That's why it's very important to have passed pawns if you're trying to win in rook and pawn endings. So g4, rook d6. Okay, I'll take that. Rook d5, rook b2 check, forcing the king to go, cutting off white's king from the second rank, as we will see. Next, the bad location of this piece will play a crucial role in the remainder of the game. So now the white king is stuck on the first rank, b4. Nepo ignores the threat at h5 and instead prepares the transfer of the king to the opposite flank. Go there. We already know from chapter 3 that in such positions, it makes no sense to advance the passed pawn to the third rank before activating the king. So it's good to activate the king. Another idea is to, instead of moving your king directly to the queen side, I think you can also go here, king f3, and make checkmate. It's possible to make checkmating threats against the white king. So b4. In contrast, king g6, I think rook here, king h6 leads nowhere after rook f5. Okay. So black is forced to give up the h pawn and go to the queen side. Okay. So b4 takes, then f6. Okay, b3, rook here, king f6. If rook b7, okay, I go here. Okay, takes here with dual threat of king f3 and rook c2 followed by b2. Okay, yeah, I mean rook king on f3 is a nice square because the white rook cannot. The black king is using white's own pawn as a shield, so the white rook cannot check the black king on f3. Okay. So after king f6, the game went king f1, then rook c2. Oh, it's not. So Nepo played king e7, king d7, then king c6. Is it? Then here, I'm gonna take the rook. Gotta move it. Okay, now king d5, going to king e4, rook c2, king d1, king c4, and the king can hide from the checks on b2. I'm gonna go there. If king b1, if king b1, trying to prevent the black king from going to b2, then the rook takes here, maybe rook f2 with the idea of here. Okay, there you go. King c1, rook f3, rook b7. Maybe I can play. If I play f5, then maybe white can play here, followed by rook takes f5. So instead of playing f5, black defended the pawn on f7, rook check, check, rook e5 check. Okay, now what? Maybe rook takes g3, rook takes f7, then rook f3. Okay, so the black king is going to help the g pawn from queening, while this pawn needs to be defended. Maybe here, then king here, king f2. Okay, so after king e2, Alexei resigned, and Nepo won this game as black. All right. Hope you guys learned something today. I learned a lot just looking at these endings, couple of rook and pawn endings. And if you like this presentation, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, YouTube, Facebook, and share this to your friends. Hope you guys to see you next time. Bye.